Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good really, really early in the morning, and all the other times.
Yeah, good morning and good night in the same sentence. People are waking up and going to bed at the same time. I guess maybe time's up. Yeah.
So today, the episode we're doing is, let's see, it's part 3 of Big Bang, What Put the Bang in the Big Bang, God or Something Else. This time we're talking about the theological take on things, God and the Bang, the theological take. And where do you want to start with this? You have an outline with you in your email.
Yeah, well, maybe actually before we start with that particular outline, when we were talking off air, you mentioned the connection between the Big Bang and sound, because when
so I'll just tell you what somebody replied to us. It said, there was no Big Bang. How they say something like there was no sound. We get there's no sound. And I was saying, I'm pretty sure the guy who came up with the term understood there's no sound. And then what?
Yeah, but here's the thing. Let's take something like bats. If you want to study a bat in the lab and think about the way that they view the world, they basically send ultrasound, which is not audible to our ears. It bounces off of things and comes back to us. So if you go to a way that to a lab where this is being studied, what you actually hear is that we're hearing some chirps. So
well, let's be more clear. People, we call this sonar. We actually have machines that do this.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say is, what is it that you're actually hearing when you're hearing the chirps? So there's a nice way of detecting this. It's called beats, and what happens is that you have a certain frequency that's inaudible to you, and you bring another frequency that's almost the same but not quite. You bring them together, you superimpose them together, and what you actually hear is that beat sound, which makes
the position of the waves, right? So you'll get some occasions where it gets added, somewhere gets subtracted. The subtracted areas are where you don't hear anything, right?
Yeah, but here there is a kind of an envelope or an underlying or an overlaying pattern, if you will, that's actually audible to us. That's the part that represents the chirps that we hear, which is basically a kind of a modification of the original signal into a form that we hear. So another example, which is pretty much related to this and then connects with what do we mean by Big Bang if we didn't have a sound. When you're talking about black holes, very often in the literature that's related to black holes, you hear about sound waves. And in fact, you get something that's related to sound wave in all sorts of situations. Now, sound wave is just the propagation of a wave in some medium. It doesn't have to be audible. It doesn't have to be a wave that's propagating
translation of vibration in the medium.
Yeah,
of the particles in the medium.
Yeah,
I'm going to say that.
Yeah, and so it's then possible with certain processing to actually change it into something audible. So, for example, one common example of that is when you have certain disturbances of a black hole, it's going to be ringing in a specific way. And you would say ringing. There's no ringing in space. What are you talking about? Well, it's exactly the kind of pattern that we're considering here, where waves in space-time itself that carry that pattern, they can be vocalized by processing to end up with something that we can audibly hear. It is still something that's
changing them. You're using a machine to receive the signal. The signal is electromagnetic radiation. We're changing it to something else, but keeping the frequency.
Right. Yeah. And so it's the same kind of thing when you're talking through the phone. What you're actually doing is you're creating a signal that's a sound signal being received and converted into an electric signal, and then transmitted as an electromagnetic signal somewhere else, another phone, then deconverts it and puts it back again. That's still not where we want to go with this, because there are two aspects for waves of that sort that have to do with the Big Bang. The first one is that the Big Bang itself does actually create waves. There are many models that predict there's going to be gravitational waves that we can detect, and that's the same type of waves that I was just talking about regarding black holes. But that's not where the name of the Big Bang came from. The name Big Bang was a misnomer. It was actually not a proper name that was reflecting an actual aspect of the Big Bang as an explosion. If you remember last time when we were talking about this, the actual name came from Fred Hoyle, who was trying to make fun of the model, trying to liken it to an explosion, when in fact, later on, as we understand it right now, it's not an explosion as such. A Big Bang, which is going to be accompanied by sound, is going to be localized in space, and then sound waves are going to be propagating from it to where you're standing. That's not how we understand the Big Bang and how it happened. The Big Bang happened everywhere, so that right now in any location you are, the Big Bang was present there. So you cannot be talking about the propagation of the signal from
So
one
like
to
so
another.
another way to say this is it wasn't expanding in space. Space itself was expanding. You could see it, like mostly the stuff was remaining in position.
Yeah. So
But
what one of
space's position itself was expanding.
yeah, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions about something like the Big Bang. And I really don't like the term Big Bang, both in English and in Arabic, because they in Arabic they literally translate it into the big explosion. The big explosion, it means that it was localized in some location and then it expanded in space, when it has nothing to do with that. We're talking about the beginning itself of what we call today's space.
All right, so let's get to the theological take. What are we starting with?
Right. So if we go back to the actual history of how this started, and remember last time we were talking about Lemaitre, who essentially was the person who initiated that in the first place and came up with this idea of a cosmic egg, basically walking back the whole thing into its logical conclusion using general relativity, which tells you that the whole thing started from a point. Um, and so we also saw how the church seized on that, thinking, well, it seems that this is vindicating what you see in Genesis. There was a beginning, and that beginning was very energetic. So let there be light. That seems to be talking about that very description. And then on the Islamic side, you see the people talking about how the whole thing started from smoke, even though this doesn't make any sense. But they view it as an indication that there was some kind of a fiery start that initiated the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of people don't know what smoke is.
Yeah.
Smoke is the byproduct of a, you know, burning of organic material.
Yeah.
It has to be organic material, right? It has to be carbon chains.
Well, yeah, but if we generalize the idea of smoke as the debris of some kind of a reaction,
Chemical reaction
a
is the point.
chemical reaction that creates energy.
So tell people, when was the first possibility that a chemical reaction could happen in the universe?
Oh, that would have been many thousands of years after. If we want to just be conservative, once we were talking about light was able to propagate, that's the farthest that we can see. We talked about that last time. 400,000 years after that initial fiery furnace, where there was a big soup that included all the particles, including light.
So let's help people understand like sort of phases. Phase one, if we're going to give it a name. Phase one, there's not even atoms. Okay. Now there has to be atoms in order for chemical reactions to happen.
And not only atoms, we're talking about molecules that can actually create the reactions that they have in mind. So, for example, if you're talking about hydrogen, which
yeah. So when we only had, so let's say phase two. Phase two, we had now atoms forming, and I guess maybe helium was forming in addition to hydrogen.
Yeah,
I don't understand it very
and
well.
a little bit of lithium, but it's just a small amount.
So those three atoms formed in phase two of the universe, but those three atoms are not enough to make chemical reactions yet.
Well, then the reactions would be really boring, because if you're looking at helium,
it wouldn't make smoke.
In order to make smoke in that sense, in the way that we usually experience it, you have to have oxygen. You have to have oxygen. You have to have some kind
Unless
of
there's an equivalent thing. Maybe there's another world with sulfur or something. If you look in the periodic table and go down from oxygen.
Yeah, but even
still, there's no oxygen yet in this scenario.
Yeah,
in phase two of the universe, still no oxygen.
Yeah, even then, with helium and hydrogen, things are really boring, because helium itself is not reactive.
Let's be more clear. Phase two now, there's still no stars, but the historical, how do I say this? For a bunch of hydrogen, because of the gravity of it forming onto itself, pulling itself together, eventually you have stars where there's enough gravity to force fusion, two hydrogen atoms combining against the force of them pushing apart. And then you get fusion. Now you have the first star. So phase three, you have the first generation of stars. The first generation of stars now had to die in order for the really big elements to form and then go on to the rest of the universe. And then, now I'm getting loud and excited now. Phase four is when you have the potential for a planet like ours that has complex stuff in it. Complex, I say complex, I shouldn't say complex. The bigger atoms.
Yeah. But even with stars, you have several generations. So you could have multiple generations of basically the guts of a certain star coalesces to form another star, which then explodes again. And so it's basically recycling and increasing the abundance of certain elements.
And maybe it took many cycles of that before there was a lot of all the other elements all over the universe. So that's another way of saying in the first, after the first stars died, there wasn't a lot of those elements around the universe. So something like the Earth couldn't exist yet.
Yeah, and so it's something like using the analogy of smoke and saying, well, look, this is actually capturing something very essential about what happened. It has nothing to do with it. Even if we thought that, for example, they're trying to say, well, no, this is not talking about the Big Bang, but this is really talking about the planetary nebula from which the solar system was born. It's not even that, because it's not smoke. Smoke as a result of the burning of organic materials is just going to be compounds. When you're looking at what made stars as the debris of other stars, you have a bunch of elements. You do have some compounds, but the compounds of smoke as we know them, they are the debris of something, earlier structures that were basically consumed through combustion, mainly by reaction with oxygen. So it's totally meaningless.
So I studied biology a lot. I'm trying to remember. The only things that make smoke is I remember is organic molecules, which are very complex molecules, very far more. I mean, they don't happen without their life being there. A very complex organism is making these carbon molecules that we can then smoke, burn them.
Right. I'm not an expert there, but I would say that in terms of the type of molecules that you can now find, whether in comets or asteroids, you can actually find some organic materials that are formed there, mainly some amino acids, but not something more complex, as far as I know. So organic
Would
material.
there be a lot of it in one place, or just a little bit here and there?
Well, again, I didn't really look at the details of that to tell specific abundances of that, but what I know is that these materials do exist.
Well, and I mean, of course, they have to exist because they were the things before life.
Yeah, but but even that step is sometimes not very obvious. Saying that something like amino acids, which are basically the building blocks of so many different organic molecules, to actually find them floating in space on a comet, why would they be there if they were intended by a god to be the building blocks that were especially created to create life on Earth? So it's not a trivial.
Can you use the same logic for, in the Quran, it talks about, iron was brought here from the skies or something.
Oh,
like that,
that's
right? But iron is not complex like an amino acid.
yeah, but iron was there in the formation of the planet. So if you're looking at where iron is mainly concentrated, it's going to be in the core.
Well, they could twist that argument and say, well, the entire Earth came here from the skies, which is true.
Well, which is true, but it didn't come down because it was in the sky. There's no up or down.
Yeah, you're right. We would be in it. You're right. You're right. Come down. Yeah. The only way to come down maybe would make sense is if it was flat. And
yeah. And the only way where this could make sense is if those comets or asteroids or whatever, it's probably not going to be comets, that they were the only source of iron that you have, that there's no iron that you can mine from the earth, which is of course nonsense, because yes, you can find some remnants of things that collide with earth that bring iron, but that's just a negligible amount of the actual amount of iron that we have on the planet.
We have a lot of iron here. The core of the earth is almost all iron, isn't it?
Iron and nickel, yeah.
Yeah, iron and nickel. Those are the two that maybe you can explain this. If you were to plot on a graph what energy you can get out of atoms, either through fusion or fission.
Fusion. If I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, go ahead and finish my thought then.
No, so there's going to be a kind of a peak that happens around that atomic mass where you cannot really go further in terms of the fusions, and that.
Okay, so let's say like this: you take the smallest atoms, and if they fuse, it produces a lot of energy. You take the next bigger atoms, helium, fuse them, you get a large amount of energy, but less than the previous one. And you keep going until it actually reaches zero. You don't get any more energy out of it. Yes. It would now consume energy to do the fusion instead of give off energy. And that crest on that graph is iron and nickel.
Yeah, and so that would be a kind of a measure of what's known as binding energy per nucleon, essentially. So if you take a sample from, well, probably we shouldn't go there anyway.
Yeah. Every time we do one of these, I keep thinking, man, one day we're gonna have a show for physics. But this is kind of what that is, by the way. This is like half physics because of who you and I are.
Yeah. But if we actually follow every little thread to its logical conclusion, it's
we would never finish any one topic. Yeah. But that happens in physics even.
Yeah, I mean, it's this is how things go.
At some point, I heard Feynman say it like in a video in an interview. You know, if you ask why something happens, and the physicist gives you the answer, you can still ask why does that happen.
Yeah.
Physicists can even, and then you reach to a point where, well, we don't know that yet. We can ask deeper, but we don't know. Or what he was saying in his case was, I don't know how to explain it to you.
Well, yeah, but there are certain questions that we honestly don't know the answer to yet, and that actually brings us exactly to the topic that we're talking about today. Because one of the things
You
that,
mean this?
yeah, but more generally, there is a misconception amongst the general public in general, but especially with those who come to science from a religious background without really looking at the science. That misconception has to do with the idea that uh, science is at some point in its development right now, and they think that this is all that science would be able to do, in the sense that it tried and it failed. Okay, nice try. Go back
I
to
don't blame them too much, because even physicists thought that. Go back, well, Newton, I think, was that way. And then before Einstein came out with relativity, I think that was the general understanding among physicists, which is Newton's theories, that's it. There's nothing going to topple it.
It happened in the history of physics several times, but what I'm talking about is a little bit more more serious. So it did happen during the time of Newton. It happened towards the end of the 19th century, right before the discovery of the quantum nature of matter, and then it happened in the 20th century, where Paul Dirac himself, one of the biggest names in quantum mechanics, essentially thought that this was it, that there's that we're not going to be progressing any
Well,
further.
I hope physicists are not doing it anymore, because, well, I'm kind of new to the game compared to all these people, right? Newton and Einstein and all those guys you're talking about. But one of the guys that's actually in the field, David Deutsch, like you, I mean, in the field, but he's a lot older than you. He wrote in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, he described the way physicists, back a few hundred years ago, thought that, what we had was it, and we're not going to be changing it after that, because there is no more, like it was the end. Mm-hmm. He goes in a philosophical way and explains why this is wrong. And he gave other examples of it too. Like he gave an example where early 20th century, all the people that were like estimating things like population growth and our ability to feed the entire population, they plotted on a graph, and everyone that mattered in saying this said, we're not going to have enough food.
Yeah.
And the basic point that David Deutsch explains is they're assuming the trends won't change. They're assuming we're not going to have new inventions. We did have new inventions in growing food, distributing food, and we didn't have the problem that everyone thought we were going to have, which is mass starvation.
Yeah. With the problem, so there are two different things that I wanted to contrast here. The attitude that some of the scientists have or had, because right now, as far as I know, people, it's very rare to see someone who is saying, yeah, we this is all we have. It's very rare to see that, especially that people right now realize that we do have a lot of hints about certain things that are supposed to be there, but we still don't know fully about them. And that's the difference in the attitude that I wanted to emphasize. That some of the scientists who come to this conclusion would say, this is all there is, and we're able to understand everything in terms of that. By contrast, the religious people are saying, you got stuck somewhere, and you're not going to be able to progress beyond that, because it's something that can only be explained by God. So that's
without an argument there.
Yeah,
the same as the physicists who don't really have an argument when they say this is it. There's no more. That's just a bald claim. No argument to go with it.
Yeah, I would say for the scientists who say that it's more a failure of imagination and creativity than anything else, because when they make such statements, they think that our experimentation has actually probed everything there is to probe, and therefore there is now a complete picture of the world. And not being able to see that there is something that could be explored and discovered.
Was there ever a time in human history where somebody could say, all the phenomenon that I see, I have an explanation for it?
Yeah, that did happen. It did happen. That's exactly
that makes sense to me, because we don't have that state today.
Yeah, we don't. So the example I just mentioned was at the end of the 19th century, before quantum mechanics was discovered, because before any of the stuff that we know has been discovered, there was Maxwell's theorem, Maxwell's theory.
Wait! I have one. You told it to me 2 weeks ago. Newton, when I asked you, which planet that Newton's understanding of motion couldn't account for, you said Mercury. And then I asked you, how did Newton see that? He said God. Yeah. That's the conflict right there. He had it in his head.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not true. There were phenomenon that he couldn't explain.
Yeah, and he thought that he basically was able to find the most fundamental thing that you can find. And that's exactly the point where, okay, I found a point where I can stop and know that there's nothing beyond it, and therefore I'm going to give up. And that's where the people who are religiously minded would say, oh, the reason why you're not able to progress beyond that is because there is a higher intelligence that's actually conducting this. So basically, when science stops, it's supposed to be giving basically the reins of things to that higher power that's not going to abide by science.
That's like saying the concept of jinn, and then if we try to say, how can we test this? Oh, they're 6 feet under, let's dig. And then they reply, no, they run away when you try to see them or whatever.
Yeah. So that's the exact type of way that some kind of tautological positions in religion are formulated. For example, that the most famous one is if something bad befalls someone, then you can say this person is being tortured by God or being punished by God because they were bad, or if they're good, they're actually being tested by God.
So you have multiple versions. Yeah, the testing. Yeah. It's not even just one. It's multiple things you can use. And they're all, one way to think of them, I think a lot of people know this term, this phrase, thought terminating cliche.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them. A lot of people use them, don't even know they're using them. But I think there's a lot of complex ones. And, like Allah knows best is one of them. It's supposed to shut you up.
Yeah.
I mean, and those two you just gave, those are also like that.
Yeah.
They're just trying to get you to stop critically thinking.
Yeah, and if you want to think about this as so it's making certain claims, and if you want to treat this as a scientific claim, it means that you should expect some kind of a prediction that's related to it. So if it were true, for example, that bad people get punished by God, then you shouldn't expect to have good people being punished, because in that case, if both of them are being punished, you have lost completely any kind of predictive power. It's going to be, like I said, a tautology. It's going to be true no matter what.
This reminds me of something I have to say to people all the time. Somebody will come to me, a lot of times my kids, but other times people on the ex-Muslim subreddit. and they'll say, why are these people doing X, Y, and Z? And I reply, what's the problem? Were you thinking they're trying to be consistent? They're not. And when you realize that, everything's reconciled.
Yeah.
Because the way they're seeing it as they're trying to be logical and then somehow failing. They're not even trying to be logical.
Yeah.
They don't give a fuck about logic. So what about the people that are mixed? Of course, there's a lot of mixed, you know. You can like be kind of logical in some areas in your life, and you kind of put a compartment in other things, and I'm not going to be logical there. And you use thought terminating cliches to help prop up those ideas in your brain.
Yeah, because if you have certain ideas that you want to defend, not because of their values as ideas independent of you, but because they connect with you in some way.
Your fucking identity.
Yeah, it makes
I hate that word.
It makes it valuable for you to defend those particular ideas because that's encroaching on you personally.
Oh no, if you criticize this thing, this idea that isn't really me, then I'm not really me.
Ah! Yeah, that's exactly how they perceive it.
And what's weird about the identity thing is it's also connected. See, the identity thing is referring to you, but it's actually connected to the group.
Yeah. You cannot have that kind of identity without a group.
And so this comes up in the ex-Muslim subreddit all the time, and people are like, what should my identity be? Something like that, right? Identity crisis, blah, blah, blah. And I say, what's wrong with human? Does that work? They never reply.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that one? Isn't that enough? Like, by the way, it's a real question, not rhetorical. Shouldn't that be enough?
It should be enough, but the problem is that humans are tribal by nature.
I don't really know what you mean by that, but sometimes when I say something is natural, I really mean it's like it's a very common, very easy thing to fall into before you know better.
No, I mean this from an evolutionary point of view, that we have developed as a species, a social species that
but the concept of identity is meme things, not gene things.
Yeah, well, that's I understand, but what's happening is that belonging to a tribe and having that tribe be against something, so that you have a kind of.
We'd be humans against Earth trying to kill us.
Yeah, that's one circle that delineates a certain region. Yes.
David Deutsch says in the same book, The Beginning of Infinity, he talks about AGI, not the AI we got now, but AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is like an intelligence that's like the same intelligence as humans, which is not what we have now. And he talks about aliens too, intelligent aliens that come here. And he talks about, how would we treat these two groups? Would we say we're superior to them? Would we want them to say they're superior to us? Or would we say equal laws, equally treated under the law? Well, I think we would do the same across all of them. I don't want aliens to come here and say I'm a fucking ant. So then you lose the human name now too, because the aliens are not humans, the AGI are not humans. The name David Deutsch uses is Universal Knowledge Creator.
Okay.
That's what an AGI is, that's what an intelligent alien is, and that's what we are. We can drop the human label too. I'm not even human, everyone.
Well, if certain machines reach the point where they're actually comparable or more superior to humans, or if we have some alien beings that come from different planets, they're not going to care about an equality that says, okay, don't treat me like an ant because I'm not an ant. Well, I'm not sure if they're going to care or not.
Well, their own morality would make them care or not.
We would think so.
I don't know what that means. Of course, all I'm saying is they would go by their ideas. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And their ideas might be far superior than ours. And we expect, I say we, David Joyce explains in The Beginning of Infinity, and I agree with this, we would expect them to be far superior than us morally, better than us.
I don't know.
Better at being peaceful. Otherwise, they would have killed themselves.
No, I wouldn't say so necessarily. I would say we wouldn't understand their motivations or actions, and some of those actions might not even appear moral to us. I don't know.
That you're talking a side topic. That's not even the topic I'm talking about.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm talking about from their reference. You're talking about what we would see in them. Those are different things, you know. But it's not that much different between a parent and a child. The parent is far more advanced in knowledge than the child. And then if you ask, okay, the child might not think the parent is doing the right thing, you know. Anyway, do you want to get back to the God of the Gaps issue?
Well, before the God of the Gaps, there are many actually aspects in terms of the history of how what eventually developed into something like the cosmological argument, or what has been popularized in the 20th century as the Kalam cosmological argument, referring to its origin in Islamic philosophy, which was used to be called Kalam. It still is used Kalam. And if you look actually at the way that typical devout Muslims view this, it's considered something you should avoid. And in fact, yeah, I mean it's
and I get why, because philosophy is dangerous to Islam.
Yeah,
we are dangerous to Islam. Apostates are dangerous to Islam, from their words, which is why they treat us this way.
Yeah, absolutely. So any kind of rigid ideology, rigid set of views that would like to preserve itself, if you have any kind of questioning, that's definitely going to be dangerous to it. And so even though we might say, okay, there was a golden age and ideas flourished there. Well, if you actually look at the people who were doing that, they were very often viewed very negatively and sometimes persecuted. So it's definitely just saying that this originated from a Muslim background doesn't mean that it's actually an Islamic halal point of view. So so that argument basically is trying to formalize, and in a kind of a biased way, formalize the view that if you see something that has been caused, there's something that caused it, and the way that it's usually presented is in a way, everything that begins to exist must have a cause. The universe begins to exist, which is what the Big Bang is saying. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause, then they jump to say, is what we call God. So the problematic aspect of this mainly has to do with a couple of things. The first thing is that the Big Bang is wrongly considered to be the beginning of time. For all we know, the Big Bang is the start of a previous phase. All that's happening here when we're talking about the Big Bang as being the beginning of time is that we're able to start making sense after the Big Bang in terms of our physical understanding, in terms of our observations. That's all. It's not saying that there was no time before that. It's just saying that our understanding, using the tools and the theories that we have right now, at this point in time, stops there. So that actually brings me to what I mentioned before we got on air, is that there are several conceptions of what the Big Bang is, that when you were talking to someone, they might have a different conception of what the Big Bang is. Some people think that it's that space-time singularity that you would get from general relativity when you basically walk back that movie that represents the universe as we see it today. You're going to find a point where everything started from, a point in space and time, and that point is then considered to be the Big Bang. Other people consider the hot phase that starts after that as the Big Bang. Other people say the whole theory that we now have that represents the phases, the different phases of the implications of that, including our phase as the Big Bang. So different ideas, and that's because we don't really understand what's happening, what was happening at that point. So that's one aspect that can be said about the cosmological argument, which has various forms, but the one that I was just talking about now has been especially championed by people like William Lane Craig, who's a very well-known Christian apologist and philosopher, and has presented it as a kind of a response, essentially, to some of the interpretations that can be considered atheistic um, uh, to modern physics. There are other versions of this. So you can go back to Thomas Aquinas, for example, who has brought up all sorts of ways. He has famously written 5 ways, but they essentially reduce to the same thing. You're talking about a progression, and that progression has to end at some point, and that point where this must end, he calls God. The problem with this is that this idea of causality, which is at the core of what we're doing here, that the idea of the cosmological argument really depends on a phenomenon that we have from everyday experience. Causality is not something like a principle. Very, very often you would see people promoting causality as a kind of a cosmic principle on par with physical laws. It's not. This is not something that's observed. It's not even the language in which physical theory is formulated. If you actually go and open a physics book, you might see that in Newton's laws, yes, you use the language of causality. You have the force, which is the cause, and the acceleration, which can be considered to be the effect. But if you go to more advanced treatments, you don't see that at all. You see
deeper into physics, you mean?
Yeah. You see a mathematical treatment in terms of differential equations, basically, and there is no distinction between cause and effect. You have a progression of an independent variable that's very often time, and you have patterns that are going to be defined by the differential equations. That's it. And there's actually no direction of time, which is basically what's required in order to talk about causality in the first place.
So cause, as we know it, is an emergent property.
Yeah. So for all we know, this is something that we can see on a macroscopic level. When you go very back to such ancient times and to small distances to the very beginning, it's not even clear what it means to be talking about time, let alone causality. It doesn't seem to be a well-defined concept. But again, they very often present causality as a kind of a principle that has to be true. But even on a logical level, if it's something that is logical, just try to deny it and see if you fall into a contradiction. You don't. So even then, it's not something that you can consider as a kind of a rational principle that you can arrive at from first principles. It's something that you extract from reality, and it has to do a lot with the error of time. And if time itself is emergent, then that's going to tell you a lot about causality itself, which is a construct that results from our conception of time.
Can you look at the top comment or two and tell me if that was related to something you were saying? And if so, I'll put it on the screen.
Yeah, put it on the screen, please. I see several comments here.
Yusuf Israel says, the real meaning in Hebrew of the so-called, or wrongly so-called, book of Genesis actually says, for wisdom spread the infinite, created all power, substances, tangible, endless, tangible elements of existence. I can't read that. What's that saying?
Nonsense.
I don't know what it's saying. It might have been saying something good, but I'm having trouble even with the grammar.
I mean, if I don't want to denigrate kind of a point of view that is put from, whether it's from Genesis, the Quran, or whatever, but quite honestly, any kind of point of view that's put there is going to be imposed on the text, and it does not emerge from the text. Uh, uh, the text of something of that sort, if you look at it, it's describing waters, it's describing a firmament, it's describing things that are common and everyday things. If I'm not mistaken, the very idea of infinity is not actually even present in that book in any way. So it's all something that gets imposed after the fact, but it's not something that emerges from the text. I'm not
making
even sure.
interpretations in a way that agrees with your theories instead of
I'm not even
the correct interpretation.
Yeah.
So let's see. Are we on to God of the Gaps issue now?
Well, in a way, yeah, because the problem with, for example, answering one of the more obvious questions about the Big Bang, what happened before the Big Bang, or how did the Big Bang happen, or something of that sort, the simple answer is that we don't know. And so that's where you end up with this idea of the God of the Gaps, because if there is some kind of a gap in knowledge in any kind of a field, and you think that this is something that has a supernatural being that is conducting that, or overseeing it, or doing it, so you can then say, okay, I don't know, I gave up. We hit a wall. This means that that God is going to fill up that gap. And the problem with gaps is that they very often get filled up at some point with actual science. It's the same thing that we had with the falling of rain, with eclipses, with all sorts of things that were attributed to gods. They were considered to be omens of certain things, and then we figured out how they work. And so that was taken away from the dominion of the god and put into the dominion of science.
And the dominion of God keeps getting smaller, and the dominion of science keeps getting bigger.
Yeah, exactly. So the Big Bang is a natural place where you would expect to talk about God, because, for example, that situation that we just talked about, it's the beginning of the book of Genesis, which, by the way, historically speaking, is not the first book to be authored in the Bible. And it doesn't even present a single coherent story. It's actually multiple stories mashed together. If you think about that, it seems to be a natural place where you would expect to find God. And so something like that is the last vestige, if you will, where you can have the God hiding in cracks rather than gaps. And most certainly to gamble on our inability to at least crack part of that puzzle is really dangerous for the people who promote this idea that, okay, it was God who initiated that. If you really want to gamble the existence of your God on something like that, most gambles against science have shown that they usually fail.
We're getting a lot of comments, and I can't tell if they're talking to each other or to us.
Well, we might be able to address a couple. What timer is it? Yeah, 50 minutes in.
There's a section in our outline we haven't touched on, I think. Misunderstanding physics, common theistic pitfalls. Or have we talked about that already?
Yeah, we for the most part, especially when it comes to causality, because uh, if you look at all of the arguments that are being presented nowadays in the 21st century, they're basically the same arguments that were presented in medieval times. They did not change. They're taking those arguments and putting them against science, and very often you would see that many of the points in science are being missed. Science is producing some things that are really counterintuitive, and if you're not really immersed in what preambles you had in order to arrive at these implications, it's so hard to unlearn the intuitions that you've had hundreds of years to have ingrained in you and in your culture. So the problem of having them face science with these antiquated ideas is really something that cannot be treated except with proper training in science to begin with.
We're scared. You're right, Yusuf Israel. We're scared to talk to you or something. I don't know how he came up with that idea.
Well,
he didn't even ask us to be on the show for
yeah,
us to say no because we're scared. Well, I don't know why people think this way. Do you have any idea? He's psychologically. What is it? What's the word? Psychologizing. He's psychologizing us. Why don't we do it back? Go ahead. Why would somebody say things like this?
Well, it seems that some kind of a scenario is playing in his head, and probably it got externalized midway through things. So I don't know.
And then he said lefties too. So I'm not a leftist. I don't know about you. I'm not a rightist either. I'm neither.
Yeah, I'm
scared of real debate. Real debate. What's a real debate? By the way, Osama, physicists, do they have real debates?
It depends on in what kind of area. If there's something that's still being developed, you can see people talking to each other in what can be considered debate. But in science, there's nothing that's ever determined through debate. You have to have some kind of solid data. You have to have some solid science, mathematical science.
Well, your debating should involve the data.
Yeah, but you're not going to be. So let's say that there is some kind of an idea that is being discussed by 10 physicists. 9 physicists agree. Does that mean that this idea has been confirmed? No, it only says that these 10 people who have been talking about it.
Here's what I tell people. Because they try to give the argument that some stuff you don't need to or shouldn't think for yourself and hand it to someone else. And the example they give is your doctor, because we don't know shit about, medical knowledge. And what I tell them is, no, don't you know the second opinion concept? If you get a doctor with their first opinion, there's a reason you might go get a second opinion. You might get a third, fourth, fifth, 9, 10 of them. If 9 of them are saying one thing and there's a 10th one saying something different than the rest, does that mean you pick the theory that the 9 share? No, I don't think you should. You should go to the one doctor and say, tell me what you know that those 9 don't. Yeah. And let him convince you. Then when you get that answer, go to the 9, each of them, and say, here's what that dude said. Tell me why this is wrong. Then see who convinces you. I'm getting angry. It's basic shit. Why? It is debate is the point. And there is debate in physics, and of course, what we're debating, the contents of it is the data. We're arguing over what does the data imply. Does it contradict this theory and why? And does it contradict the other theory and why? And then also, you're also some of the arguments is what predictions does this theory actually make? You know what I mean? It's not so fucking obvious. There's debating happening there even.
Yeah, but if we want to compare what would happen in physics as opposed to um, science, other fields of science like medicine that you mentioned, but also if you extend that to courts, to politics, to things of that sort, where it's basically opinions, things that are not really clear cut, things that are very
A murder
fuzzy.
case?
Yeah. So
I'm saying they're looking at the evidence, and that's a real debate happening. The two lawyers. And anyway, so check this out. He knows things that would prove that you're wrong about everything you know. So we're wrong about 1 + 1 = 2, apparently. And he has documents teaching us that we're wrong about 1 + 1 = 2.
That very statement is very problematic. How do you know everything I know, and how did you refute it to begin with?
He said all of it, so that includes 1 + 1 = 2. Go ahead and teach us how 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2.
Yeah.
Why would I want to pull up your video? Why are we trying to show other people's videos? How about this? Say something here that would make me want to look at the video. All right, so this next part, you said confusing contingency with physical necessity. Is that something you already talked about?
There is no. Okay, so what probably is referring to is the idea of causality as not something that is embedded in logic, but is an empirical principle. So that does not follow from a logical necessity as such.
So according to this guy, what? Only lefties can be confused? So we're confused about something, therefore we're lefties. I don't know what's going on. So discussion point, is the Big Bang compatible with belief in God? Could a deity still play a role in post-Bang?
Well, let's think about the first part of this. Is the Big Bang compatible with the belief in God? If you want to believe in God, you can go ahead and do that. The problem with the idea of God is that there is no well-defined idea of what it actually means. So you can start with the old man with the beard in the sky and say that this is God, and then progress to saying, well, I didn't mean that. I meant actually the physical laws. This is what I mean by God. So it depends on what you actually mean by that. But I'm assuming when people think about God, they're talking about a kind of an intelligent being that might have been responsible for the universe. Is that compatible? Well, if we're trying to recreate the conditions of the early universe right now in the lab, then yeah, it's possible to come up with an experimental setup that tries to replicate that. Is that what happened that initiated the universe? The flat answer is that we don't know, but it's really projecting us onto the universe and trying to come up with a really narrow-minded scenario based on our human reality onto the universe. So I would say unlikely that this is a situation that happened.
What I would say about this is something I've said before. I'll say it a little bit differently now. If you have a God theory that says a lot of things, the more things it says, the more opportunity for you to see that it's incompatible with something like the Big Bang. And if you say, okay, all right, I'm going to remove things from the God theory that would make it incompatible with things. Well, if you go far enough, it's just the most plain God theory that says God made the universe and that's it, didn't do anything else after that. But then you've relegated it to nothing. It has no place in your life anymore.
Yeah. So the problem with the idea of postulating an intelligent, conscious being to be the whole thing responsible for this, I mentioned that before, but let me reiterate it here. So the problem with that is, in order for you to actually arrive at this through science, you have to find a stumbling block that you cannot supersede in principle. That you reach a place where you know that you cannot proceed beyond that using science, and that doesn't seem to be actually anything that makes sense, because any place where you're talking about a scientific investigation, it's always possible to think of alternatives. It's always possible to wait for new developments, whether in the technology that's being used to experiment or in the theories that are used. So getting to the point where you would say, okay, I give up, that doesn't even make sense from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, none of it makes sense. By the way, so we're not actually done with this series. We have part 4, which looks to be just the philosophy of all of this. What is nothing, and is that even a meaningful question? Philosophical nothing versus physical nothing. So we got lots to go next time. Mulhid al-Islam says, Toba, Toba, astaghfirullah. By the way, that he says that a lot. Is there a meaning there that I'm not understanding? Toba means sorry, right?
Yeah, that's what you would say after saying something wrong. So we're supposed to be.
And astaghfirullah, I forget what that means. I know when
God,
people say it, but what does it mean?
God forgive me, or I'm asking for forgiveness from God. Okay. Can you display the comment right below that, please?
Yusuf Israel says, you pretend you know what the Hebrew scriptures, tradition, and prophecy is. That's why you think it's a book about how, when it's a book about why.
Okay, let me answer this, and that's basically going to be the end of this series of comments. So I'm not pretending to be an expert on the Hebrew scriptures. I know about it. I have read quite a bit about it and read the scriptures itself, but I'm not an expert. What I have read and what I have read experts talk about it show very much that it's just a human concoction that is basically not producing anything that pertains to the reality that we live in. It's just what ancient peoples have come up with to make sense of their reality, to make sense of how they're dealing with other people. So it's really nothing beyond that.
It's the type of thinking people had long before real good scientific thinking.
Yeah, we're talking about Bronze Age, Iron Age thinking. What would you expect?
The ancient Greeks were around that time, weren't they? Or a little bit later?
A little bit later, and
and they had a lot of nonsense, to be clear.
They did have a lot of nonsense, but I wouldn't even make a comparison between the implications that you would have from the Greeks compared to the Bible. Now, well, that does not say that scripture does not have a value. It is a formative text when it comes to the Western civilization and even to the Islamic civilization, but to say that it has value beyond that goes into science, I'm sorry, that's not where things go.
So I just wanted to say, Mulhid Islam, we'd like you to write more comments. Your comments are fun. Let's talk a little about other things. Let's see. We have a manifesto, not made by me or anything. Apostasy Day, hashtag Apostasy Day. It's actually called August 22nd, Apostasy Day. Mm-hmm. 6,500 signatures. I think I was 6,571 or something. I don't remember. And the link is in the description. Please go sign that if you think that we should not have the death penalty for changing your mind about God. Anniversary event, the first anniversary of Uniting the Cults, this organization that this live stream is about or run by. June 14th, 10 a.m. Central Time. I'll have with me Mariam Namazi, Wissam Sharafuddin, Apostle Alauddin, and Zara K. And then we could talk about, I don't have any housekeeping. We could talk about what's next week. Well, we actually already know that. That's part 4 of this series.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about some new episode ideas I have. So let's see. What do you think of this? God is the worst manufacturer.
Are we talking about biology here?
Yeah.
There's
the only thing people try to say the universe itself is not perfect. I don't even know what that means, or it is perfect. But they say humans are perfect, that's the thing I want to go after.
Well, I don't know if
I made a joke, or I don't know if I heard this joke from someone else. I think I got it from someone else. That there's some recalls missing. Like there's some recalls on that he didn't do. You know. Zorro says, by the way, he thinks he's very aggressive about this too, very assertive. He's like, nah, if I would have done it, the knee joint would be like the shoulder joint.
Yeah.
And he talks very confidently about that. And another person who also talks confidently like that is Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I don't agree with this logic that these two are doing. They're seeing it like an engineer could kind of from scratch remake the body. And it would be good on the first design. No, it would take many iterations of trying to get it right. And that's what our knee and shoulder has gone through, okay? Now, one obvious point to mention the difference between shoulder and knee, the shoulder doesn't need to carry a lot of weight. The knee needs to carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
I don't think the shoulder joint at the knee would work.
I don't know either. This is also going into a little bit of physiology, but there is a British physiologist, I forgot her name, who basically showed what if we were to redesign humans, what would you get in order to improve things. It might be actually worth looking into that.
Well, there's one example that these two people give that I agree with, because they already have an idea of what the solution would be. I forget the name. There's a nerve that starts at the brain, goes down below the larynx, and up into somewhere else. And the idea is, the engineer's idea is, you don't have to go around that thing. You can go straight across. It's a shorter trip. It's much more clear in a giraffe.
Yeah. There's actually a famous video where Richard Dawkins goes through an and
there's this woman cutting out the nerve, saying, see this thing going all the way around? It doesn't have to. That one is very clear, can be re-engineered, because you're not doing that much of a difference, you know?
Well, the thing about evolution is that evolution is working on individual traits. It's not looking at the holistic animal. If you're talking about an intelligent designer, they're going to be, like you mentioned, an engineer is going to have a vision, and they're going to be implementing that vision in order to achieve certain things. That's not what happens in evolution. And that's why we end up with all these things that they do work, but they work because of natural selection, not because you actually ended up putting them together to work together. And so you have all those remnants that show the history of what the animal has gone through.
Well, that's part of the point. Like when a new, how do I say it? When there's a new species, of course, I'm skipping a lot of steps, even just saying that. It's not like the way that got made was to go back to the beginning and say, how could we have done this? It's not like that at all. It only looks back at the last step. And so anything that happened before that, it has no knowledge of.
Yeah. There's a nice book that Dawkins recently wrote. Let me try to remember the title. It's called The Genetic History of the Dead, or something of the sort. And what he's trying to present in it is how our history, or how the history of our ancestors is actually written all over us. And he brings a very simple example of a chameleon, for example, or a lizard. If you look at its skin, at its back, you can actually basically infer what kind of environment it developed in. So all of this is showing you that what we have is going to be put together or understood in being put together in order to accommodate certain things. And it's going to serve a purpose. It's just that along the way, you're going to collect all sorts of junk, all sorts of things that show that history that your ancestors have gone through in order to get to this point.
There's a lot of weird things about it too, because when you get a new gene variant, first of all, that was random. The statistical chance that would be a benefit instead of something harmful is very small. And then there's this issue. Suppose it is beneficial to you. It could also have a detrimental effect in some other way. You know what I mean? Like, what is it? There's telomeres. There's something in our genetic material that if there's a lot of it, if the telomeres are long, we heal faster, but you have way bigger chance of cancer. If you reverse it, less chance of cancer, heal slower.
Yeah. So I think it's actually a good idea to talk about some of the marvels of, or rather the defects of humans, and considering them as a designed product of a god. You wonder what kind of god that would be, what kind of an engineer it is.
Yeah, what the fuck is cancer? Cancer is a really weird thing.
Well, cancer is a manifest expression of the fact that we are continuously evolving. When you have these runaway mutations that then overtake the whole body, that's showing you that there is always the level of mutations is always high inside the body. It's just that the body keeps it under control.
What I read was we get our first cancerous cells at like age 14, and your body fights it, kills it, keeps it small, whatever. And then throughout your life, if you're helping your body's immune system, then you stave off cancer for a long time. If you're not helping your body's immune system, cancer comes a lot quicker. And the thing is, early on, very early on in human history, we died at like 30. Okay. So there was no, actually, let me take a step back. Evolution doesn't work on us after the age of giving birth. So let me make that clear for everyone. If I'm 15 years old and I get a disease and die before I have kids, my bad genes don't stay in the gene pool. Mm-hmm. So the rest of the humanity is saved from me. If I am 30, already had kids, then I find out I have this gene that, disease gene that kills me. Well, that stays in the gene pool because I already had kids. So here's the point. Evolution doesn't help us live better or live longer after giving birth age. Now, what's that mean? What does that mean? That means most of our lives, the evolution is not really helping us. We're trying to live to like 80 or something. We have kids at 20, so from 20 to 80, evolution is not helping us.
Well, you can look at people who are considered usually old, when they are no longer able to procreate. All the investment that would be coming from your biology is no longer there. And essentially, the fact that we have people living to 70, 80, this was not something that evolution was promoting. This is something that we're doing against the tendencies of evolution by artificially treating illnesses, by artificially helping people that would otherwise
I
not.
wonder if there was an opposite effect too, because I recently learned of a organism that I forget what it's called, but it in the first phase of its life, it's trying to find a rock and attach to it. In the second phase of its life, it digests its brain because it doesn't need it anymore because it already found the rock.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Now imagine evolution is doing that to us. I don't know that it is, but imagine it was doing that to us, making us die after we have kids. I mean, way after, so that leaving room for the other
That's exactly
individuals
how,
in the species.
that is exactly how things are.
What do you mean? Oh shit!
I mean, if you look at people who live to an old age today, it's not something that would happen naturally. Um, uh, so their life is being extended by the care of others. If you're just looking at this from a purely biological point of view, at a certain age, even if you don't have a disease, you become disabled in one way or another. You cannot fend for yourself. You cannot bring food unless others are taking care of you. In that case, you wouldn't be able to survive to that age. And so, the death in general, which is considered to have its own thing as given metaphysical significance, death is just the mechanism to conserve energy. You have you have invested in an individual. That individual can no longer procreate, so it gives way to another set of individual, and so on, to also allow the renewal and the continuation.
Help me understand. Maybe you know this. Just picking another organism that lives about as long as us, and I mean us today, not us back then. Turtles live about 80, 100 years, right? Are they having babies the whole time?
I don't think so, but don't. I'm not a biologist to begin with, so I'm just speaking from my general knowledge.
How long? What is it? How long are turtles fertile? Males with 1 or 2 females. It doesn't say how long. 4 years? I don't think they're understanding my question. I have to ask ChatGPT maybe. Hold on. Just a few years? So why are turtles living for so much longer after their birthing years? I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Sometimes it gives some good logic. Let me ask you a different. How long do turtles typically live after their fertile years? Decades. What are they doing? Are they taking care of their young? They don't really do that. You know how turtles start? At least one of the species.
Well, they if we're talking about the water turtles, they have the mother coming to the shore, laying down the eggs on the shore,
and then they dip,
Yeah.
they run away. Bye bye, you're on your own. And like 90% of them die.
Yeah. So you have to have enough in order. Yeah. If there isn't enough, you know that there are predators there on the beach, in the sea, whatever they're going to go to.
Anyway, we're gonna do some episodes about biology.
Yeah, that would require more preparation because again, that's not my field. But definitely there are certain things that
I studied biology for 2 years in college with 2 years of chemistry. It's plenty. It's enough.
Yeah, that I'm sure, but that still doesn't make us experts.
We don't need to be experts. Yeah. Yeah. Did you see that discussion on Joe Rogan with who he had on his side was Dave Smith, and they were arguing with Douglas Murray, and almost the entire first part of the episode was arguing whether someone is an expert and whether they should be talking about the Israel-Palestine issue. That's such stupid talking. Arguing about if somebody's an expert. It doesn't matter. Talk about the thing. We'll see if you're an expert based on how you talk about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand. But what I was saying is that sometimes, like what we were just saying now about turtles, sometimes if you're trying to speak from scratch and then making certain big assumptions, it might lead to already debunked results or already verified results that you don't have to really come up about this from scratch. So that's what I'm saying. If we're going to be talking about that,
like I want to talk about. Well, actually, the example I already gave is God is the worst manufacturer.
Yeah, there are so many different things that we can talk about, whether it's the design of the fact that we walk upright, how that affects our backs, the fact that we have teeth that don't seem to be serving any purpose.
Certain teeth? Which teeth?
The wisdom teeth don't. We no longer, our jaws compared to the size of our ancestors are much smaller.
So that's true. If you study something called Mu theory, a guy named Mu, who was a dentist or an orthodontist, he explains, and this goes along with the thing that you just said about our ancestors. When you don't eat tough materials, your jaws don't form right. And even spacing is messed up in your jaw.
Yeah, and it seems that
I don't know the effect your wisdom teeth have on your immune system. You just make stuff up. What stuff did we make up?
The suffering that seems to be caused by teeth pushing against each other. But no, if you think that this is going to hurt your immune system, well, go ahead and keep on suffering.
Well, and that's an issue. If your jaw formed over, we're talking like a decade or two, you actually can't fix it after that by proper behavior. And now your face is going to reform. And that's why they have orthodonty. They actually expanding. Well, they don't actually expand your jaw, but they're moving teeth around.
Yeah, they're just ensuring that the teeth are not pushing against each other.
And actually, that retainer they put in for you has to stay in to continue pushing against the forces that caused your mouth to be fucked up in the first place. Because those don't go away. Mm-hmm. I know a little bit about it from having to go to the orthodontist for my kids.
Yeah.
By the way, another episode I thought of. Somebody said on the ex-Muslim subreddit in something like these words: Islam makes the most sense to me compared to all religions and atheism. And so I asked him, I said something like, so I think what you're saying is you've compared a bunch of these and Islam made the most sense. So tell us, what are the ones you compared? So he wrote a little bit, and he said his dad's an atheist, and he presented atheism as if it is a competing system, which it isn't. So I said atheism is not a worldview. You need to say a worldview. There's many worldviews that are atheistic. There are many worldviews that are theistic. So then he wrote back saying some details about his dad's thinking. It was so little. And I said, this is missing tons of stuff. It doesn't say any epistemology. How do we know what we know? By the way, Islam says stuff like that. Christianity does. A worldview would do that. And it needs to be clear on morality and other things too. And anyway, so that's like a lesson in you can't say atheism as an answer. It is not a worldview. All it says is there's no God. There's like so little there.
Well, there's something that Islam claims about itself in comparison to Judaism and Christianity, which is that it's the middle way. In fact, there's actually a verse in the Quran that talks about that, and it portrays Judaism as being too strict and Christianity as being too lax, that it relaxed a lot of the rules of Judaism, but Islam came and fixed that. So that's something that Muslims usually like to tout when they're trying to compare themselves to others.
All right, what else did I have? I have one. I don't know if I told you this. Debating Muslims. What's the best way to do it? What has worked for you? This episode, I want to try to get a lot of people calling in to explain what they have seen succeeded. But of course, we'll be talking about ours. Did I tell you about this one? Optimism. What is optimism? Does it make sense? Should we be optimistic?
No. What do you have in mind for that one?
Well, David Deutsch has a chapter on this, the principle of optimism. Something I noticed after reading that book, most people, when they talk about optimism, their conception of it is, I know stuff's going to get better, like for sure. Well, that's goofy. You would have to take the right actions. The way David Deutsch says optimism, he says, it is that it's possible to do better. We have the capability to do it, but then you got to go do the work. It's like the difference between irrational optimism and rational optimism.
Yeah,
and I think there's an irrational pessimism and I guess there's a rational pessimism in the sense that, well, maybe if you know you're dying today because of whatever cancer information you got from your doctor, you can see your end right there, right?
Yeah.
Or like recently I heard this one. Zorro showed this to me yesterday. I'm like, what the fuck? I can't believe I didn't know this. In 2010 or 2015, there was a show that was saying, and this is all a bunch of physicists talking, that there's a neutron star coming our way. And within 75 years, I think that's 65 years now, it gets close enough to our solar system, it dislodges some of the meteors and comets and there's millions of those coming around our star, right? Mm-hmm. Dislodges some of them, and maybe one of them hits us. And they were presenting it as this is happening in 75 years. I don't get how they said why it's 75 years, because to me, if you dislodge some comets, that still might take 10,000 years before one of them changes its orbit and finally hits Earth.
Right. I don't know about the what you're saying, but from a statistical point of view, it's not hard to come up with estimates, and probably what's being quoted here is the average time that would be taken by a random sample from that set of comets.
So maybe it's like 100,000 comets are coming at us, are close, or maybe 10 of them hits us.
Well, not necessarily coming at us. What's probably is happening is that there's going to be a disruption that's going to happen in a given direction, and then if you calculate the probability of maybe if it's a centralized event and it's providing a kind of a push in a given direction, it's going to show in the form of a cone, and that cone is going to have a certain size, and the density that you would have of the asteroid population is then going to make you do the calculation of roughly how many would intersect with the orbit of Earth. But I'm just trying to do a kind of a rough estimate of the situation, but I don't know anything about this.
So, by the way, I want to get to something earlier when this person said, you're scared to have me on your channel, blah, blah, blah. And I asked you, why do people say stuff like this? I know why people say stuff like this. They're trying to shame us into doing something. And they think that because we don't want to show off that we're scared, So if he says we're scared, then we will act in a way in reverse of that to show that we're not scared. So he must think we're so stupid psychologically, like we're so stupid that would work on us. No, it's not going to work on us. I'm not that stupid. Maybe when I was 5.
Well, as far as I know, that person is just a name and a picture of a natural scene. I don't know anything about that person. I have so many different things to engage with in life. So how would I even form a position from that person in particular to say if I'm scared or not scared? It's just that I don't know anything about that person to have significance on the happenings of my life to begin with.
It reminds me of there's this I think it was Brett Weinstein. He said there was this one of his people that follows him. I can't say it's a fan because that he gets on his social media and keeps saying the same thing. You're scared to talk to me? Why don't you talk to me? You're scared to talk to me? And it's reverse things. Why don't you talk to me? You're scared to talk to me. Why don't you talk to me? You're scared. It's like, and all he wants to do is block them. That is not a way to engage with someone. You know what I mean? Like, why say it?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. Sometimes in our group on Facebook, you get something like that. If that person is in the group, they're in our home basically. So yeah, sometimes I do engage people of that sort if we're in the same place, if we're interacting in some way. Regardless of the childishness of saying something like that, it's if they're presenting a point, I can engage with a point.
Yeah, and scared of what? Scared of finding out we were wrong? By the way, I would love to find out I'm wrong because then I'll be right after that. You see the logic? I remember somebody saying to me once, we were discussing something, and he said, you just want to be right. And I heard that, and I know what he meant. I said, yes, I do want to be right. Why the fuck are you saying that like it's a bad thing? You know? But the way I'm going to do it is to fix my mistakes and then end up on the right side after you fix the flaw. So I'm not scared of finding out I'm wrong so that I can then be right and be better than I was before. What's scary about that? What it's scary for them. That's the point. It's scary for them to lose their religion. And they're flipping it back and they think everyone else is like them.
Yeah, that's definitely I'm not going to generalize. I don't know what's inside this person's head, but I've seen that during conversations show up with other people. Yeah.
By the way, we're willing to talk to people from other religions on the show about things, but I mean, like, be respectful. None of this has been respectful. And by the way, we don't want people that are disrespectful. Why would we want? Like, imagine, like, I don't know, somebody in your class. You're a physics instructor, okay? Somebody came in and they're being an asshole and saying, "Hey, teach me this," or "Let me teach you this." No, it has to be respectful. Why would anyone want disrespect?
Well, very, very often in situations like that, it's very easy. Well, first of all, it's very rare that this happens. But when it does happen, it's not hard to diffuse the situation if the person really wants to learn. If there's an actual willingness to learn, then there's an actual willingness to have conversation.
I'm reminded of a story. My professor told me he was doing an astronomy class, and he was explaining how the light from the moon is bouncing from the sun. So the point is, the moon doesn't produce light, the sun does produce light. And somebody raised their hand and said, no, the moon produces its own light. But then they don't go on to explain how it does that, and they're not explaining why the professor is wrong. Well, that just dead ends the discussion, but also, why are you in the class now? What's the point of you being in the class? Nothing happened there. That's what I feel like most discussions are with religious people.
Yeah. If you're trying to defend an idea and you have no intention of actually going into the details of the idea and having a back and forth about that idea, then there's no discussion. It's just
this is just an outright fucking lie. And by the way, lying to us is not respectful. This is just a lie. You don't know what me or Usama knows about Hebrew. Or Hebrew is a language. Why is it? What's that even have to? Why is he even talking about Hebrew versus Judaism?
Well, you can ask him.
I don't know Hebrew. Nobody pretended that. And Usama does know Hebrew. By the way, let's talk about that. How do you know Hebrew? Where did you learn that?
קודם כל אני רוצה לדעת אם מה שמך יסיף ישראל, איך אתה יודע את הדברים שאתה יודע, ומה שאתה אומר באמת לא רלוונטי למה שאנחנו מדברים.
Man, you can't be talking another language. You could be cursing my mother and I wouldn't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe I got too amped up this episode, too much yelling. You notice I yell a little bit sometimes.
Well, we probably should wrap it up at any point.
Yeah, it's almost done.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Somebody's speaking some logic. How do you pronounce that name? Do you know? Kafaya?
I don't know. Cafe.
They're saying, Yusuf Israel, if you want to engage professionally, then comport yourself with respect. Otherwise, you're making baseless accusations, screaming absurdities, and meaning nothing. Thank you. Anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and stop here. And I'll see you next week, Usama.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everyone.